thank you guys for all coming and sharing, my passion of philosophy. The word philosophy is philo, which is love, and Sophia, which is wisdom. So the love of wisdom. And so I really thank you guys for coming out and sharing this with me. And it's going to go deep. My intention is to take you guys deep into your center. I'm going to be drawing on a lot of different traditions, so it's a syncretic approach to knowledge, pulling from 6,000-year-old books to modern philosophers of today, like myself. You're also going to be challenged. There's going to be some really heavy philosophical language. It's meant to challenge you. So if you get challenged, I ask you to take that and tune in instead of tune out, because it's easy to just go, oh, I don't quite jive with this, or I don't quite understand it, and then I'm just going to tune out. I would ask you to challenge yourself and tune in, because language is incredibly powerful, and I'm going to be using a lot of esoteric language. I'm not asking you to believe what I'm presenting. I'm asking you to suspend your belief for the next hour, 15 minutes or so. And whatever you currently believe, just put it on pause for an hour and just really try to see what I'm presenting. Just go with it. You can make up your mind as to what you like and what you don't like, or agree with and what you don't agree with later. So I'm going to be opening up little doors of perception, and literally this is such a heavy topic. I'm just going to be scratching the surface. I'm going to just peer open some of these doors, ask you guys to look inside with me, and each one of you guys is going to have some doorway that you're like, that's really interesting. I'm really interested in that. I resonate with that. I gotta know more. So my goal here tonight is to inspire you guys to do your own research. If you're showing up for a talk like this, there's something in you that's engaged in your own self-development. So I'm gonna just open up all these doors and hopefully get you guys to follow up with some of these great authors and great minds that have inspired me to write my books and to stand here and do this kind of speaking. I also created a book list here. It's pretty massive. When you guys leave, I would ask you guys if you're interested, grab one. They're free. To me, this book list is like honing down on about 22 years of work that I've done, and really weeding out a lot of the frivolous work that is like a regurgitation of someone else's work, or just not refined, or just what I would call woo-woo, the New Age movement. This is what I'm talking about tonight. Should not strike you as a New Age type of talk. I'm going to be drawing from Hermeticism. I'm going to be drawing from the Bhagavad Gita, Egyptology, all kinds of things that are very ancient, so they're not new. Matter of fact, none of this knowledge, I'd also like to say, none of this knowledge is mine. I don't claim any of it for my own. I really like that phrase of, men and women that have seen great things or have great vantage have done it by standing on the shoulders of giants. So I'm just going to share with you just a hair of the people that I consider to be giants and great minds. And a lot of them are obscure. Hopefully there'll be about half of them that you guys have never heard of. And that's a success for me, because I'm paying these people tribute and trying to bring them back into my community, my common unity, so we can all have a common unity and share some of these really obscure but brilliant writers and people and their concepts. And so maybe you guys will be inspired to follow up with some of them on the book list. There'll be a Q&A at the end. If you guys have questions, hold them, write them down, and just I'll do my best to answer them. And let's see, what else? Silence your cell phone, please, if that's happening. And quoting Plutarch, the Greek/Hebrew philosopher, education is more about starting fires and less about carrying pails of water. So what does he mean by that? He means that real education is not about remembering facts or figures. It's about teaching the human being or the self how to learn, how to be inspired to learn. And so my goal is to light a fire, inspire you guys to think in a different way, use a different level of discernment, and to shift your paradigm. If not if not just for fun, just take it where you can go. So the name of the presentation is The Sovereign Self. And here we go. Isha Swaller de Lubbock's. But to reveal truth to another is a thing no one can pretend. One's only instructor is oneself. So that's a high and mighty statement. What she's really referring to is that we are our own priests, priestesses. We are our own shamans. And we can actually empower ourselves. And it's not that you don't need teachers in your life, but the whole point of a real education, or what I would consider to be an integrous teacher, is to teach one how to be their own sort of guide, their own guide. I have an acronym for the self, SELF, the super elevated levels of freedom. So I'm proclaiming here tonight that the self, by design through nature, is sovereign. And that it's just something that some of us are in tune with, and some of us have yet to be in tune with. So how do we reach these super elevated levels of freedom? 3 big, simple steps, but big ones. Open the heart in order to change the mind. The head and the heart, or the heart and the mind, have to be working together in order to create a balance and to create this sovereignty. So open the heart, change the mind, and empower the being. And those things should be all happening simultaneously. This is my friend Carrie Mae Rose. She's a beautiful artist who makes wings from only natural materials all around the world. You can check her out, carriemayerose.com. Michael Tessarian, who's a Irish historical revisionist and a modern philosopher and a heavy esotericist. Man has always asked the question if things have essence. We know that things have appearance. We can see them in reality, but man has wondered about essence. And the great philosophers like Schelling and Heidegger have shown that the trick is in the quest. Is that man by design himself is the essence giver to things and objects. So we shine the light in the reality in which we move and on the things and objects we come in contact with. Man himself, quite literally, is the essence of essence in the unconsciousness. This points directly to the mysterium of the mind. And the mysterium of the mind is an older Greek term just referring to the ego, or whatever the mind is centered on and identifying with. So when he says the mysterium, he's basically talking about the ego. And that all philosophy is really seeking the origins of existence and being. To me, this is what this is all about. Philosophy, the love of wisdom, is really seeking existence and being. These are oftentimes such questions that are so hard to answer that people just shut down and they stop asking themselves, what is it? What is existence? What is being? These big questions that philosophy tries to answer. Why are we here? We are the sovereign self of existence. So I'm going to be using a lot of words, like defining words and using etymological root words, because in my practice, it's taught me a whole lot about myself and the power of language. So etymologically, to define the term sovereign, it simply means supreme or highest in power. The etymology is the 2 words sover, which emanates from the Latin meaning super. So the P and the V are interchangeable. So sover and super literally mean the same thing. Reign, which we probably already know, to reign supreme or to rule. So a sovereign self that is self-aware is actually what we would call a superman, or a superwoman. So it's one who rules him or herself. The British philosopher Alan Watts, waking up to who you are requires letting go of who you imagine yourself to be. This is a quite simple statement, but it's really profound, because if we don't allow space for new potentials in our minds, if we simply keep our belief systems where they're at constantly throughout life, we never grow. So he's basically saying this apophatic process, which is a deconstructive process of what you think you know, is what's required in order to empower the self or become more centered. Rudolf Steiner, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Rudolf Steiner. Brilliant, just a magic genius, biodynamic farmer, architect, mathematician, philosopher, created the Waldorf schools, which we still have here in the U.S. He has a slew of work. I highly recommend people look into Rudolf Steiner if you haven't read him. A lot of it is actually free, also online, and he's written on so many different subjects that it's amazing. But to be free is to be capable of thinking one's own thoughts, not the thoughts merely of the body or of society, but thoughts generated by one's deepest, most original, most essential spiritual self, one's individuality. So here he's talking about the importance of being an individual, not in an egocentric way, but he's also opposing it to one of the things here is merely the body or of society. And you'll notice when you get into really, really deep esoteric thinking or existentialist philosophy, a lot of the great minds are anti-society. It's not that they hate people, it's just that they have realized by deep meditation and deep contemplation that society or the collective sort of maintains a status quo, which we would call mediocrity. It doesn't mean that none of us are good people. It just means that when we get together, we sort of acquiesce and we stop challenging ourselves and go, oh, I'll do what you say, because it's easier. And then people don't grow anymore in the collective. So he's really pointing towards freedom of being an individual, being your unique signature, who you came here to be on planet Earth. One of my favorite authors, Carlos Castaneda, extremely mystical language. You have to really understand his syntax. But man is born with the impulse to witness everything, but is brutally mutilated during the first years. And so we must rediscover it. You have to clean your concern of all your prejudice and return to that child's pure curiosity. A warrior is forced to verify all the knowledge that arrives at his door, to experience it in full, no matter where it comes from. And then he has to have the necessary discerning ability to select and keep what is useful. The warrior's commitment with the spirit consists of a return to our original nature. It is a pact we all seal by the simple fact of having been born. He's again pointing to the purity of a self that doesn't have programming from our family or from our society yet. And this is often why children say the darndest things that oftentimes they're just dead on. They're so honest and truthful. It's because they haven't been programmed yet by our environment, by the people in our environment. So he's pointing towards our original nature as being something that is corrupted over time as we go through life. He's not coming down on society. He's saying in order to remember this child's pure curiosity, you have to work at it. You have to engage in your own selfhood. He's the one who brought the Toltec teachings back to the West. John Locke, the natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. And John Locke is pointing towards our greatest teacher as being nature. And this is something I resonate with really highly in my life and in my spiritual practices. And he's just pointing towards the fact that men will tend to deceive other men. They'll create laws that benefit themselves. And that the original state of grace that the human being is designed to be in their divinity, is not ruled by any other human. Again, the power of language or the power of the word. It's been said, in the beginning was the word. And so the word is what the mind needs. The mind needs symbols in order to form things. And so words literally kindle and uphold our reality on a day-to-day basis. Even if the words that we speak inside of us are unconscious, they still tend to manifest in the physical world, especially the dominant ones that we say to ourselves. So here I'm pointing out this idea of talismanic words used in daily media and propaganda. And these are words that are actually, over time, designed to dumb down us, to dumb down society. And people just go, well, what's that all about? We don't realize that we use words incorrectly. And so that's why I'm such a big proponent of etymology. So, for example, the word decadence. We all know that word, but whenever I hear it, most people use it incorrectly. Most people think of decadence as being something full of pleasure or something that we can fall into and enjoy. But the meaning of the word actually means moral or cultural decline, to dissipate, to degenerate, or to decay. And how many people actually know that that word means that, and how many people actually use that word in its correct way? So this is just showing you how often we use words that uphold our reality that are actually fragmenting our reality. They're actually not, you're actually sort of not speaking the truth, and we're unaware of it. Philo, more about the power of the logos. The logos of the living God is the bond of everything, holding all things together. Same thing, power of the word. Here's a few words I'd like to go over, and there's tons of them, but here's a few that that have always resonated with me throughout my studies that I'd like to sort of set the record straight on. Aryan. Most people know this word and they immediately associate it with some sort of race, most likely the Caucasian race. But the word does not refer to a race at all and never has. It's been talismanized by our popular culture. So the Sanskrit root word for Aryan is Arya, or Aryan, meaning worthy, holy, or noble. The ancient name for India is Aryavarta, literally meaning the abode of the Aryans, the noble ones, from the Bhagavad Gita, page 173. Another one, multiple universe. Trash this one. Just take it out of your lexicon. It doesn't exist. The word universe means one song or one verse. So everything is all encompassed in one unity. So there is no such thing as a multiple universe. So when you speak these things, it's actually upholding sort of an aberration of reality instead of reality itself. God particle, another one. Something that's omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, which means all, everywhere, always, all the time, all-knowing, cannot be bound up inside of a body, especially a tiny little body called a particle. So there is no such thing as a God particle. It doesn't exist, never will. Sanity, it's just a good one. It simply means to clean. So when we're sane, we have a clean body, a clean emotional body, a clean mind, and so on and so forth. This one's tricky, the individual. To me, the way that I read this word is divided up into in, which means not, divide or divide, which means to split, but dual. So an individual is someone who is human. So they're dual in the fact that we have 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 legs. We're bifurcated, we're split right down the middle, so we're dualistic. But the individual that is sovereign is actually is dual, but not divided. So they're still one or whole. The word atom, which is another scientific term, A-T-O-M, in its oldest origins actually goes back to the Egyptian god Atum, which is the sun at a specific time of day. So Atum, the sun, represents wholeness because the sun gives life to everything. So when we say the word atom, it originally refers to an esoteric teaching of the sun in ancient Egypt. And we have other words, Aton, the Atonists, Adon, which is where we get the word Adonai from the Hebrew scriptures, which eventually is where we get the word Adam, which is just the cosmic man, the man who is aware of his cosmic consciousness, is basically aware of the infinite. Nazareth, another interesting word. Nazareth it actually means tree or branch in Hebrew, and no archaeologist and no scientist has ever actually located a town called Nazareth anywhere on planet Earth. The reason why they haven't is because the word's original meaning refers to a tree or branch. And in its Hebrew connotation, it refers to the cerebrospinal system of the human body. So the brain would be the root, if you turned it upside down, and all the nerves and all the cerebrospinal system actually look like a tree if you turn it upside down. And so the tree of life is literally the Nazareth. Moses, which was originally an Egyptian name for Tutmos, which got shortened to Moses in Greek and Hebrew. It literally means of water. So it's referring to water. Jesus, or Jesus, because the letter J didn't exist until the 15th century in the English language or in Latin language. So we didn't have a J until the 15th century. So Jesus' name in Greek is spelled with an I and with a Y in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, the word yes means sun or fire. And then the second part of that word, sus, is where we get the Latin and Greek word for Zeus, which eventually became Zeus. Eventually became Dios. So we say like adios, which means go with God. So quite literally, Jesus' name means son God, which is a really interesting etymological root. From the word Dios, we get the word Dei in English. So you'll see the Catholic order or Latin words like Opus Dei. Opus Dei means, it just means the whole sun. And so the word D-A-I and the word D-A-Y are the same root word. Again, referring to a deity or Dios, because in ancient times the sun is what dictated our whole life, and especially our year. So we worship the sun because it was the great timekeeper. Horus, this is a word we use all the time. Horus refers to the morning sun in ancient Egypt, and we use words like, we get the word hour from this, and we get the word ora or aora, and we get horizon and horoscope, which are all references to the sun. And the reason being is we're quite literally going, well, where is Horus in the sky right now? You know, what time is it? And then another interesting word is hormone, which is a combination of the sun and then the word mon, which is where we get the word month or moon, which is basically the unification of the sun and the moon, or the male and female energies or aspects in nature. So hormones are what need to be balanced in the human being. Otherwise, we can be too feminine or too masculine. We can be too intellectual or too intuitive or emotional. It refers to a balance. Piano, pi, literally refers to a circle, like 3.14, circle. And anno is where we get the word to annotate or annual. It's another measurement of time. So the piano is this really interesting harmonic that resonates with the human body. The human body has 14 phalanges on each hand, and you play the piano with your hands. And it just so happens that the human body, settled, even though there's many different styles of pianos, it's settled on 88 keys as being this harmonic that really felt right. And it's not a coincidence that the harmony that happens when you divide the 28 phalanges, divided 88 keys by 28 phalanges, you get 3.14, which is a perfect circle, pi. So this is just encoded into our whole being when we're aware of it. Pious, again, just means holy, to be aware of the whole. The word one, or on, as in the word ontology. The definition of ontology is the study of being. So that's where we get oneness or onness. The word Krishna and the word Christ actually come from the same root word in Sanskrit. So Krishna and Christ were actually Christ, Christos, and Christ in ancient Egypt. They all refer to the cosmic consciousness. And so, quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, when you read this particular part of the Gita, page 423, it's all about the history of the Gita itself, the history of India. Spirit or cosmic consciousness, here symbolized as Krishna, gave the indestructible Raja Yoga science the technique of uniting the soul and the spirit, the ancient Illuminato, Vivasat, which means the deity of the sun, symbolic of God's omnipresent light, or creative cosmic energy, which is manifested also in man as the microcosmic sun, or light of the spiritual eye, the epitome of all life and consciousness in the incarnate being. So here's a reference to the actual sun being personified as a cosmic principle known as Vivasat, and being a reflector of the little sun that exists within the human body or the human brain, which would be sitting inside of the optic thalamus, the pineal gland, the spiritual eye. This word discern, something that we're all doing right now if you're tracking with me. The word discern means to see. And when we go back to its original, oldest roots that we can find, again, the Bhagavad Gita, the root for discern is, and I don't know how to say this correctly, but it's Ishvaku. And so the son of Manu, which Manu means mind, and the first king of the great solar dynasty, the Shastrayas, Yasa, thus uses the name Ishq, Vaku, to signify the birth of the astral I, the astral life force and consciousness, through the instrumentality of the mind, or manu. So quite literally, the root Ishq is where we get our root disc. Again, referring to a complete circle. Why does Ishq and Dishk refer to a complete circle? Is because, again, it's a reference to a solar dynasty. And the sun has always been, and I think always will be, powering our consciousness as long as we're here on planet Earth. So discern literally means to see. And so that's what we're doing today. Another quote from Plutarch, speaking of education. The very spring and root of honesty and virtue lie in good education. So this is the same man that said, you know, the education is more about starting fires than filling pails of water. He's pointing towards that real education is selfhood. It's knowledge of the self. It's not necessarily about learning facts and figures. It's about learning who you are as a being, a spiritual being. And so here, I'm gonna ask the question, well, may we have gone wrong somewhere? If you look at our current state of society, is everybody living the life to their fullest potential? Is everybody living the way that they should be living, according to them? And so Plutarch is one of these people that's always asked, where have we gone wrong? And so I'm going to quote Benjamin Stewart from the movie Kymatica, which is free. It's online. It's a very esoteric movie. It's a documentary. An explanation of our conscious universe has been attempted by religion, science, and philosophy. The neglect of biological nature from any organism causes illness. A divorce from nature, an exile from Eden, the confounding of tongues, these are all symptoms not of a biblical God or deity, but of the true self. The greatest and only threat to ourselves is loss of self, which is the death of our divinity. As we barrel through history with oceans of information, yet barely a drop of wisdom, we have to understand how we lost ourselves. Benjamin Stewart. How did we lose ourselves? Some people would say, well, we haven't lost ourselves. But if you really look deeply into the state of affairs, and this may be challenging, the way that we treat our planet, the way that we treat animals, is a reflection of the way we treat ourselves and our fellow man. And so, 1,600 years ago, Plutarch was like, something's not right here. What's going on with our education? Why are we destroying our fellow man? Why are we treating ourselves in this way? And so we turn to sadism, which is a word most people don't want to talk about. And it's challenging, I understand. But sadism is basically self-hate. And this is a quote from Erich Fromm. And he was also on this same page, highly discerning, highly critical of society. But he's not doing this to be a bad person. He's doing this to try to wake people up. So the aim of sadism is to transform a man into a thing, something animate into something inanimate, since by complete and absolute control, the living loses one essential quality of life, freedom. So they are not free. They are not sovereign. Why does this happen? Again, quoting Michael Soveriegn, who is an Irish philosopher, antipathy to nature is, in actuality, antipathy to the self, because nature is living mind, and we are it, and we are in it. The body is nature, but we did not create the body. Nature did. So the origin of all man's neurosis and pathology is man's antipathy to nature. Let me repeat that. The origin of all man's neurosis and pathology is man's antipathy to nature. The consciousness of man, the fall from grace, is man's disconnection from nature. Wilhelm Reich. I don't know if you guys have ever read the work of Wilhelm Reich, another genius. Did all kinds of things, from curing cancer to helping people with fertilization. He was into deep forms of meditation to change your mental behavior. Only the liberation of the natural capacity for love in human beings can master their sadistic destructiveness. R.A. Schwaller-de-Lubeck is, in my opinion, the smartest man who's walked the earth in the last 300 years. Of course, I don't know everybody, but if you haven't read R.A. Schwaller-de-Lubeck, you should consider it. He is by far the wisest Egyptologist, and will shatter your paradigms of Egyptology if you haven't read it yet. This is from his book, Nature Word. The fundamental error we have made is to have accepted a mentality which is in contradiction to the thinking of nature. We granulate into time and space what could be a grasping of a whole. We use spatial language to speak of non-spatial concepts. Our psychological consciousness projects its picture of things as a fragmented play of opposites back into the external world and takes this picture to be real. So this is where man or society could be going wrong, where we create an image of something that we believe to be real, and instead of really digging deep to find the truth of it, we just accept it for real and as real, and we live our lives according to that, and we suffer because of that. And in no uncertain terms, this is what the physicist David Bohm spoke about, who was a protege of Einstein, to his own academic peership. He wrote a brilliant book called Wholeness in the Implicate Order, and he's still alive. It's another amazing book, and he's basically challenging his own physics that we have today, the Newtonian and Einsteinian physics, and saying, you guys are just looking at fragments, and you're not actually putting them together as a whole. And he's basically edifying the same thing that DeLubac was saying. So I'm going to define conscience. I'm going to use the word science to define conscience, because the word con means with. So if we're functioning with science, we have conscience. Conscience is an inner feeling or voice acting as a guide to the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior. So here we have science, which is supposed to be objective, as a reference to our inner feeling, our inner voice. This is pointing towards the clear fact that science comes out of the mind of man. It's not necessarily always true. So conscience, with science, rightness or wrongness, refers to a moral act or discernment. So science is born of a philosophy, a way of thinking and acting with reality. And this is just an interesting way of edifying this. This is actually the magnum opus of Sir Isaac Newton, where we get almost all of our current physics. This is his greatest work. This is his largest book, where we get all of his formulas and theorems. And notice what he decided to title his greatest work. It's the philosophy of natural principles in mathematics. It's not the science, it's the philosophy. It's a way of looking at things. So even he knew, because he was a Hermeticist, he even knew that he may be right and he may be wrong. Numbers can be manipulated like any language. So he was smart enough to call his book a philosophy. The first and noblest of all victories is for man to conquer himself, Plato. Again, Plato is just trying to point to us that if we aren't honest with ourselves, if we aren't integrous with ourselves, if we don't care for ourselves, we're going to suffer. And so our greatest victory is to really understand our own power as a self. Consciousness creates form. Form is the sacred science nature reveals inside and outside the divine man. The etymology of science, SCI, refers to the root word in Latin for SCIS, scission, to split. That's where we get the word scissors. So science, literally, the first part of it means to cut or split. So science is a paradox that can only be resolved in repairing. Repairing means to take two things that have been split and put them back together, to pair. So you repair them. Or pair again, the inner with the outer reality. All true science is the sacred awareness in nature as wholeness. This is the key. All true science is the sacred awareness in nature as wholeness. If science is fragmentary and it's not actually working with nature, then it's not actually sacred and it's not actually whole. And this is where a great deal of science has gone wrong. Schwaller DeLubac again. Initiation is self-induced. Consciousness is itself sovereign, self-defining. Very powerful statement. Measure is the precise definition of cause to its end. Each thing, by this fact, has in itself its own measure. But this measure becomes all the more complete as the thing effectively summarizes the cosmic ego. That's a heavy statement. What he's really trying to say is consciousness is none other than the measure of itself in itself. So when we realize this, we realize that we are our own limits. We are our own We hold ourselves back, or we free ourselves. No one's going to do it for us. And when we step into that center, we become sovereign, and we become even more conscious. We become conscious, the self becomes conscious of itself. This seems very abstract as long as we do not allow the term of comparison to intervene. This is the case for the mineral and again for the plant. But as soon as we enter the animal kingdom, we see duality formed, in which the being becomes more and more animated and is so, or appears so, because it is capable of measuring itself. In other words, it becomes conscious of itself, takes cognizance of its I, of its ego. So this is where, what he's trying to say here is this is where the human being sort of separates from the animal kingdom. It's not that animals don't have consciousness, but their level of self-reflectiveness and their level of self-awareness is quite different from the human being. We have to be responsible for our own I, or the things that we choose to identify with. So it is consciousness that evolves, not form. So we're constantly looking at forms, at least modern science, the materialistic reductionist science, is constantly looking at the form of things and seeing, well, how is it evolving? But what they're not looking at is that it's not the form that evolves at all. This is a new way of looking. It's an old paradigm, but it's relevant now. It's not the form that is evolving, it's the consciousness within the form that is causing it to evolve. So we need to be aware of the consciousness, not the form. Thus I can say everything has its own measure or consciousness. Better still, everything is only conscious in itself. Or all form is only the determination or appearance of a state of consciousness. You will, I think, understand me and will eliminate for yourselves this antique and false notion of intellectual consciousness, meaning stuck in the left brain, but which has nothing to do with cosmic consciousness, which means right brain. It is consciousness which evolves, not form. Changes in form result from evolution in consciousness on both the individual and the cosmic level. So there's a relationship between the individual and the cosmos, and we need to be aware of it. I'm going to skip this slide because it's so dense and it's going to take a long time. But I will say this is very interesting. When you read Genesis in the Bible, there's the phrase that said, God said, "Let there be light," Genesis 1:3. So when you read this, you realize that no planets were created yet, no solar system, no man, no quote-unquote atom, no being, no cosmos, no nothing. So when God said, and he spoke this, right? Let there be light. Who is he talking to? Maybe himself. Or herself. Thomas Sowell, great psychiatrist, brilliant guy who also stood up against his peership and said, most of psychiatry can be solved without the use of drugs, without the use of pharmaceuticals. And they shut him down big time because he was right. There's big industry in pharmaceuticals, but he's well worth reading. People often say that this or that person has not yet found himself. But the self is not something one finds, it is something one creates. So what he's doing here is trying to wake us all up and help us to realize that when we go through life as a soul or a self, the soul is just a spiritual term for the self. It's not that we are born with everything already there. We have innate consciousness for sure, just like a seed does. But it's our duty as a self to engage in selfhood, to actually use our creative soul, our creative faculty, to create the life we want, the things that we innately desire. And it puts the responsibility of your own self back on you, instead of, basically playing victim card when things don't go right. Thomas Sowell again. In the animal kingdom, the rule is eat or be eaten. But in the human kingdom, define or be defined. Again, he's pointing towards, if you don't define your own self, by default, you will be defined by others, whether you realize it or not. You'll be defined by the status quo of society, or by your parents, or by your family, or your friends, or your political affiliation, or whatever you join, your religion. William Blake, magical, mystical, incredible poet, English poet. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason or compare. My business is to create. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. This is the hardest thing for man to wrap his mind around, is that things could quite possibly, and I'd say are, infinite. Most people can't do that. They can't wrap their minds around that, but Blake can. Carl Gustav Jung, protege of Sigmund Freud. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Heavy. He's talking about shadow work. He's like, you can imagine fairy tales if you like, but you'll never evolve your consciousness. You will be in a constant state of arrest or some sort of anxiety or fear. The only way in order to is to really sit down, sit still, and do an inventory of yourself and do shadow work. This is what real teachers, priests, priestesses, shamans, that's what they really do, is they get out of their own way and they allow the spirit to, and they guide you through the darkness, right? But they know that you are your own light. And they know at some point when you hit a certain place, you will realize you're your own light. And that's their job, is to guide you in such ways. This is another heavy statement. This is from Jesus, Isis Christus. When you see your likeness, you rejoice. But when you see your images, which came into existence before you, which neither die nor are made manifest, how much will you bear? It's from the Gospel of Thomas. Well, it's a really esoteric statement, but when you see your likeness, you rejoice. This is the mirrors that you already accept as yourself. I'm tall, I'm fit, I'm happy, I'm pretty, you know. When you see those things reflected back to you, you're like, yeah, that's great. But when you see your images which came into existence before you, which neither die nor are made manifest, how much will you bear? He's pointing to this really, really deep spiritual concept that consciousness is what creates the form. So consciousness came into existence before you and I, before the body. And we have the ability to be aware of that, even though it came before us. Because at some point you can transcend time and you can step into eternity. I know that's really heavy, but it's a very powerful statement. And Schwaller de Lubeck's echoes the same thing in the same book, Nature Word. With man, the return begins, the liberation from consciousness, from form or formal, which means the body, corporeal, contingencies, and the move back towards conscious, incorporeal being, which means immortality or eternity. With the human being, nature enters into the phase of material disintegration, meaning losing the body, losing the form. For you as an individual, there is that which precedes you individually, and that which precedes you in general evolution, because beyond and greater than you are the immortal consciousnesses of the saints and masters. Through consciousness, the universe is but one single thing. All is interdependent with all. Carl Jung again, the contents of the collective unconscious are archetypes, primordial images that reflect basic patterns that are common to us all and which have existed universally since the dawn of time. Basically saying the same thing in a much more concise way is that we have archetypes that exist in consciousness that we incarnate with because they existed before we did, or at least before we did in form. So these are our greatest fears, and these are also our greatest triumphs, and everything in between. And they do take symbolic form. And when you see them in your psyche, you have no choice but to acknowledge them. And that's what shadow work is about. Isha Schwaller-Lubeck's, the wife of R.A. Schwaller-Lubeck's, one of the most profound books I've ever read in my life. I think she only wrote one book. It's called The Opening of the Way. The body houses the consciousness, but consciousness creates the form. That's from Plato again. The body is the house made of clay and water, but it can become a magnet for the spirit. And one would never guess how impetuously the spirit rushes into a body, which opens itself to receive it. Everything comes to him who has the courage to lose himself in order to find the universe. The abyss does not swallow him up. It is he who expands into the abyss. Another way of flipping the typical way we think is that we already are infinite. We just may be unaware of it. And this Schwaller-Delewitz is a Hermeticist, and she's just trying to say that when you drop the persona, when you drop the ego, and you basically drop your form, at least in that moment, you expand. And you could quite potentially expand infinitely at that moment. Carl Jung again. If things go wrong in the world, this is because something is wrong with me, the individual. If I am sensible, I shall put myself right first. For this I need because I need no outside authority. Again, he understands that he is a sovereign being. So I need a knowledge of my innermost foundations of my being in order that I may base myself firmly on the eternal facts of the human psyche. Self-knowledge, know thyself, probably the wisest words ever written. Carl Jung also, I'll read this one from him. We know that the mask of the unconscious is not rigid. It reflects the face we turn toward it. Hostility lends it a threatening aspect. Friendliness softens its features. He's talking about the unconscious and saying the way it works is it will reflect our approach to it. So reality, we are co-creators of reality at some level. We don't realize in our unconscious that we might be projecting our fears or our internal dialogue could be horrible, and then we wonder why life is horrible. He's saying if you're aware that consciousness is speculative, meaning lens-like, it's a mirror, even your unconscious, then you can start to become more aware of the way you approach reality and the way you talk to yourself and the way you work with nature and reality. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside of you as fate. Another way of saying the same thing is that our unconscious is constantly conspiring and putting situations in front of us and asking us to act in order to make those things conscious. And they're painful. I mean, sometimes it's like, I don't want to do this, you know? It can be brutal for a time. But it's actually the deeper part of ourselves asking us to step into our selfhood, step into our sovereignty, step into our divinity, and become aware of it. Isha Schwaller-Delewitz again. The aim of every tradition of wisdom, is to gain the keys to the inner kingdom. For to hold that key is to the kingdom of heaven, which is a kingdom not of this earth. But the man who seeks it has his feet on the ground and his body is his instrument. But the will to light reveals from time to time the secret being within him. The true name of that being, though unknown to his bearer, is the thread that binds together all his existences. And its consciousness is the divine kingdom, in which the human personality becomes the servant of the immortal self. This is basically aligning your ego, and the ego is another talismanic word. Most people, when they hear that word, they think negative, negative, negative. The ego is this bad thing. We've got to squash it. It's wrong. It's totally wrong. The ego, none of this could actually occur. Our own selfhood, our own unfoldment could not occur without the ego. So the ego has a divine property. And when the ego identifies with the immortal consciousness or understands its place in the cosmos and harmonizes with that, the ego falls right in line and your light can shine through, and you're not in a state of fear or anxiety. You're basically walking with nature instead of against it. This is the Adam Kadmon, the cosmic consciousness, the man who's self-realized. And you know, self-realization right here, a couple blocks away. You know, they didn't call their organization God realization, or deity realization, or Dionysus realization, or Shiva realization. What did they call it? They call it self-realization. Because they're leading you down this very, very long path of consciousness so that one day you'll realize that it's always been you. It's always been within you. It's Never not. Always will be. Walter Russell. If you guys have never heard of Walter Russell, get on that. He is an electric universe scientist as well as a philosopher. He was a master horseman, a master sculptor, a brilliant artist, genius. And his work is really powerful. If you have a chance to read it, I would suggest it. All knowledge exists. All mankind can have it for the asking. It is within man, awaiting his awareness of his all presence. Knowledge cannot be acquired by the brain from without. It must be recollected from within the consciousness of self. Walter Russell in The Secret of Light. Knowledge can be obtained by man only through awareness of the spirit within him. Lack of that awareness is the tragedy of today's civilization. I'll repeat that. Lack of that awareness of the spirit within him is the tragedy of today's civilization. The underlying law of creation is rhythmic, balanced interchange. In all transactions in nature, it is the one principle. It is the one principle on which the continuity of the universe depends. Likewise, it is the one principle on which the continuity of man's transactions, his health and his happiness depends. Balanced, rhythmic interchange. It is the manifestation of God's two opposing desires in all processes of creation. Balance is the principle of unity or wholeness. And it is the stability which lies in cause. So we're always seeking, what is the cause? What is the cause? What is the cause? Well, if you don't know the cause, at least you know its stability lies in balance. So focus on that if you can't find the cause, until you find it. Balance is the foundation of the universe. I guess you could have just said it in one line, but there you go. Everything created, this is Walter Russell, everything created by man first exists as a universal principle, which is perfect in nature and imperfectly worked out by man. Again, this is our own, the way that we project or think that we've got nature figured out, and we create a reality, and we live based on that, and it may or may not actually be true. This is a whole nother, I'm probably going to do a whole nother presentation someday on the cubic waveform. This is some of Walter Russell's artwork, and he really goes into the nature of light and the nature of physics, and it's all based on waves. This is called the cubic waveform. I won't be able to go into explain it right now, but at some point you can read that. What he calls his subjective mind is his consciousness, his spiritual storehouse of all knowledge, all power, and all presence. That consciousness is his self, his eternal self, through which his omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence are expressed as he slowly becomes aware of their presence within him. So he's pointing towards that we not only are self-defining, but there's no limit to our awareness of our awareness. There's no limit to how deep you can go. And when you think that you've found a limit, you just defined yourself. We do this all the time. This is from another documentary called Absolute Inclusivity. Pretty heavy language, but I'll just read part of it. That which its very essence is unconditionally all-inclusive contains no opposite. That is to say that being inclusive of all realities as representations of the self is unconditional love, containing the essential quality of absolute inclusivity, and does not differentiate itself into duality, bifurcate its beingness, or distinguish itself with dichotomy. The vastness of its all-inclusive acceptance includes even that which opposes it, denies it, rejects it, or is ignorant of it. He's talking about unity consciousness, cosmic consciousness, Christ consciousness, self-realization. Walter Russell. Neil Kramer, this guy speaks currently all over the world right now. He's wrote a book called The Unfoldment. He's a British philosopher and esotericist, and he wrote a book, The Unfoldment. It's brilliant. The will is divine. Divine power is physically oriented. It would be placed at the solar plexus. Through the will, we come to balance. Through the radiance of will, we come to know things. Through the experience of the flesh, we feel the truth of these things. Will is something that emanates from the core, from the center of the universe, from the center of us. It is always true. It is always complete. It is always available to us. And it's only the static or fog of our erroneous thinking that separates us from the signal, the center of the universe. To bring oneself into a place of balance is absolutely critical. Our sense of integrity, honesty, and honor come from this transcendental core that come from the will. They are beyond mind and beyond heart. Neither heart nor mind is bothered with these things. And when we build those things into our lives, making honor and integrity a major part of what we do, we become more powerful and more truthful. And when we find it hard to be honest and integrous in our deeds, that means we have become separated from our will. And this will is extremely dangerous to machine culture, to the empire. So here he's talking about the word empire. He's referring to the part of our culture that we accept to dominate us, meaning the things we accept to be true because we don't want to look. And this comes through as a constant barrage in our media, newspapers, television, radio. It's easy to see this. All you got to do is put your television in the closet, and in a matter of days, this becomes pretty apparent. Because the constant drip of negativity, or just fragmentation, or just egocentricity or narcissism, constantly washing over you affects your center. It puts you off center. And so here, that's what he's talking about when he's talking about empire. Because the will is of divine origin and is there as something that confers upon us the individual absolute sovereignty. Again, he teaches sovereignty. Okay, now we're going to go into some geometry. Hopefully, you're tracking me here. The number 9 has been said to be the number of completion, a sacred number for a lot of reasons, and I'm going to quickly try to explain that to you. 9 encodes both phi and pi. Those are 2 transcendental numbers, and they form vortex mathematics, or vortex technology. They form a spiral. The root word of spirit is spiral. Same thing. Let's skip that one. Nikola Tesla knew this. If you only knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. And he's speaking of the waveform again. He was, an electric universe scientist, and so he opposed atomic theory, and I agree with him. Is that atoms and particles really only exist in our minds. They don't actually exist in nature. But what does exist in nature is the waveform, or waves. So follow me here. If you take a circle, the one on the left here, and you divide it, which means to create an angle, your first division is going to be 180 degrees. You split it right down the middle. If you continue to split the line you just drew infinitely, every single, as long as you do it bisymmetrically, as long as you split every single line right down the middle, that's called converging into a singularity. You can do that infinitely, and every single angle that you create, the numbers of that angle will always add up to 9. So nature's telling us something here. Like, this is a universal. It doesn't matter what size the object it is. It always works this way. So what this is doing is actually, if you were to map this, take that circle and make it a sphere, so it's 3-dimensional, and you take the energy and you take all the energy from the outside and you go into a singularity, infinitely small, and you were to map that, it would actually move in a spiral inward. And so 9 encodes that. I'll explain this to you. So, these are all angles that are bisymmetrically split, and you can do this infinitely. So 9 and 0, if you add them, is 9. 4 and 5 is 9. 3, 1 and 5 is 9. 2, 7 and 0 is 9. 2, 2 and 5 is 9. 1, 8 and 0 is 9. 1, 3 and 5 is 9. Doesn't matter how many times you do this, it'll always add up to 9. 9 encodes vortex mathematics, or the spiral. Going back, now if you were to take that same sphere and you were to go to this infinitely small point, and you were, instead of going inward, you were to go outward now. Same thing, but expanding outward. So when you hit an edge, you created your sphere, but you still wanted to expand further. Well, then you shatter that boundary and you'd go bigger, and you continue to do this infinitely. The way in which we can map this, you have to map this with a geometric shape. When you're going outward, it forms shapes, polygons. Polygons are shapes that fit inside a sphere where every angle is the same measurement. the same degree. So it doesn't matter how many polygons that you would create. So the first one would be a triangle. You can kind of see this in here. I have a laser pointer, but it's packed away. The first triangle there, and then you would create a sphere, right? So the one on the left, the polygon, the equilateral triangle, is 3 angles of 60 degrees. So they all have the same degrees. If you take all 3 angles and you add them, you get 180 degrees. 1 plus 8 plus 0 equals 9. And so in the next one, this one, this is a hexagon. So each of the 6 angles is 120 degrees. If you add them all up or multiply 120 times 6, you get 720. 7 plus 2 plus 0 equals 9. You can do this infinitely small, going inward, or infinitely large, going outward. What is nature trying to tell us? Nature is trying to tell us, hey, pay attention to the spiral, because it's the most efficient movement that we do. So all life, all death, all seeds, all embryos, all chemistry, they all are birth, grow, and decay in spirals. And this is the Platonic solids, which is named after Plato. These are actually the same thing. These are Platonic, meaning that not only do they fit inside a sphere, but every angle touches the edge of the sphere and is actually the same length. Every line is the same length. So I'll just go through real quickly the bottom. Same thing, 720 degrees, 7 plus 2 is 0. 1440 degrees, 1 plus 4 plus 4 plus 0 is 9. 2,160 degrees, 2 plus 1 plus 6 plus 0 is 9. Just edifying that same point. This is what it would look like if you were looking at it. And these are called the twin opposing vortices, which are also magnetic and electric. So the magnetic side would be feminine, and the electric side would be masculine. And this is based on Nikola Tesla, Victor Schauberger, D.B. Larson, Walter Russell, and other electric universe scientists. We see this as the most common maneuver in nature all the time. We just don't pay attention to it. So this is just a few things where we see it. The way in which our hair grows out of our head is in a spiral. We see this in the eddies of water along the coastlines of spirals. This is the way a flower blooms. It's always creating a vortex or a spiral. Wasps and bees make their hives in a cone shape or a vortex cone or a spiral. The nostril, we have little rings inside of our nostril, and it gets narrower and narrower. And each one of those rings actually, when you inhale, the air doesn't just go in equally. It actually goes around the outside and speeds up as you inhale. Because this maneuver is the way nature has designed it. It's built into the human body. It's built into river systems. Obviously, it's built into tornadoes, cyclones. It's actually built into the way electric current undulates as well. Vortexing spirals. Obviously, we see it in water. And the work of Victor Schauberger is incredible. If you have any interest in vortex mathematics, Victor Schauberger was, back in the day, was actually working on machines that were, once you set them in motion, would be perpetual motion. They would continue. And a lot of people believe that he actually solved it. And some of that information has been suppressed. But when you read his work, you realize that he is totally in harmony with nature. So his science is actually much more sound than what we use today. We use an entropy-based science, which means we're constantly digging stuff out of the ground and exploding it, and then it's gone, so we have to do it again. And this is a path to destruction. This is why the earth is polluted and things like that. So vortex mathematics and the electric universe model is all about renewable energy. We also see this in fire. If you watch fire, it actually moves in spirals as well. So we see this on the smallest level. Like we see this in the human body. We see this in flowers. We see this in our hair. But we also see it in the cosmos. So this is telling you that the universe has said, this is a universal thing. We use the number 9 as the most efficient movement, vortex movement. So pay attention to it. This is actually what they call the dome of heaven, where all the stars of the night sky rise and set, with the exception of these constellations which would be Draco, Ursa Major, and Ursa Minor. And these constellations have been worshipped for thousands of years because the ancients knew of the spiral. It's encoded in a lot of pagan traditions, and it's encoded in a lot of temples. This slide is basically just edifying that point that the way that light moves based on our perception, okay? This is just the way that we perceive it. If you're the person on the right, you're being bathed by vortex cone of light, and you don't see any darkness. You're literally just blasted by light. All your vision is light. But if you're this person on the left, you're actually standing outside of the vortex cone. Technically, you are still being lit up. You're actually still in light. But your vantage is different. So you're actually able to see darkness. And you're also able to see the shape in which light is displaying itself to you based on your perception. Technically, light squares itself inversely, so it moves omnidirectional. But our limited senses perceive it as a vortex cone. And based in the three-dimensional world, it is a vortex cone. And so it's just interesting to see that the human psyche, I believe, works a lot like this. So if you're the person on the left, you actually are doing shadow work because you're aware of your inner light, but you're also engaged in the places that you know you need to shine light in. Vortex, we see the vortex in the belly button of the human being. We see it it's displayed as the phi ratio or a spiral or the Fibonacci sequence in the human body. So real quick, each joint is in a ratio to the next adjacent joint as you move up the body, like up the leg or up the arm. And each joint is going to get a little bit longer, and it's going to grow and stabilize at a ratio of 1.618. When you map 1.618, you get a spiral. So the human body is actually a vortex as well. We see this in plants. We see it everywhere. But if you were to watch a plant grow from the ground and watch it from the side, every time that it branches off, it actually branches off a little bit higher than the branch before. And that ratio of each branch branching off is 1.618 throughout the whole life of the tree. If you were to watch the same tree and you were to watch it from above and watch each leaf pop out, and then the stem will grow a little higher and the next leaf will pop out above that, the leaves don't pop out on top of each other because they're all seeking light. So they're smart and they go, well, the most efficient maneuver that we can do is pop out just a little bit to the side. And they basically pop out in a spiral. And this is so the plant can maximize its energy based on its rooted space. It's brilliant. And this is what we do. This is what the human body does. This is the way our lungs work, the way our heart works, the way the retinas in our eyes work. It's something we should be aware of. Now, this is pretty interesting. Most people think of the solar system in a Newtonian fashion, which is where it's like a flat pancake and the planets sort of run around it and the sun appears to be stationary. But we know that the sun is moving through the solar system at great speeds. And so this doesn't make sense to have this pancake sort of thing happening because planets cannot go faster than the sun. So they can't actually go out in front of the sun because the sun is actually powering the whole system. They can't go out in front of it and then come back behind it and go out in front of it if the whole sun is moving. Okay. So Bode was Titus Bode was a mathematician and a philosopher, and he was studying at the time what would be electric current. And he came up with Bode's law, and Bode's law is actually later in life was applied to our solar system. And lo and behold, not only are harmonics that build plants and phyllotaxis and build the human body and build molecules and embryos and everything else, the same exact system works in the solar system. So the spacing of our planets, the first 7 actually, can actually be verified with Bode's law, which is a law that we also verify with the movement of electric current. So this is why the electric universe model is pretty damn sound. Here's this is the way we would sort of explain this. Bode's prediction based on his math, 0.4 for Mercury in a ratio from the sun. And then the actual observation by astronomy, current astronomy, 0.39, pretty close. Venus, 0.7. Actual observation in astronomy for Venus, 0.72. Earth, 1.0, 1.0, right on. Mars, 1.6. 1.52. So on and so on and so forth. Now, it drops off after the 7th planet, and this has always been like, why? What's going on? It's because nature is a harmonic. And that's what all of these concepts that I'm talking about, by the way, they're all somewhere found in my book. So the book is called Sun King because I talk a lot about the harmonics of nature as well as how it affects our consciousness. So these harmonics change when you get to the 8th planet because it's a lot like music where you have an octave, and then when you hit the 8th note, technically the first note and the 8th note are the same note but 1 octave higher. So there things change a little bit. I don't have time to go into that, but we see the harmonic of nature exhibited everywhere throughout the universe. We see it in cloud formations. This is interesting. We see it in the way water moves through the gills of a fish. So water changes speed as it rushes through the gills of the fish, and as it exits, it actually comes out in these little tiny spirals and hugs the body of the fish. It does this to oxygenate the fish, but it also does this to help the fish move through the water. Because those little bubbles act as this little barrier so that they can sit in extreme powerful currents and sit still with very little energy. So it's the same principle that the plant uses to gain sunlight, but the fish uses it for movement. And we use it too throughout our entire life. We see it in hurricanes. We see it from the smallest to the largest. We see the spiraling vortex in our own galaxy. So why are we not taught this in science class? Why is nobody teaching vortex mathematics? Why did I not learn this in school? It's even in our DNA, the smallest things that you can possibly imagine. So these are cone cells, hence the name cone. It's a vortex cone. These cells are piezoluminescent, which there's only 2 places in the body where this happens, in the retina of the eye and in the pineal gland, which we call the third eye. Piezoluminescence means that the gland actually emits light on its own through electric current, and it also absorbs light. So these cells are very unique. They always work in spirals. They form in the shape of cones. Why is this? Very interesting. So the pineal gland is said to be the seat of the soul, and this is why you'll find it in very, very old and ancient architecture and spiritual traditions. It's often hidden or subverted, but this is actually the staff of Dionysus, and it's referring to a pine cone on the end of a staff. And you have to ask yourself, well, why would they just put a pine cone on the end of a staff? What's significant about that? Well, we get the word pineal gland from the root pine, pineal. It's a cone. And so these ancient people knew about the power of consciousness as the human body, as the temple of God. So a lot of people don't like to use the word God or whatnot, but whatever your spiritual tradition is, all reality occurs within you. And so there is a sort of harmonic convergence, which I believe is in the pineal gland. And so it was worshipped worldwide for thousands of years. And we see it in temples all over the world. This is just one example. This is Angkor Wat, called the Temple of Light. And they have these cone shapes all on it. Coincidence? No, I don't think so. This is the staff of the Pope with the pine cone on it. What symbolic meaning are they trying to show us? This is actually the Vatican itself. This is the courtyard on the backside of the Vatican. If you guys have ever been to St. Peter's Cathedral, it's amazing. It's one of the largest structures in the world. It's actually a Hermetic temple. There's a great book, Robert Laval, fascinating. The whole thing was built as it's the largest sundial in the world. And so you have to ask yourself, why do they have this massive pine cone? Like, you could choose anything in the world. Why a pine cone? Well, this pine cone is like 18 feet tall, and it sits at the center of this courtyard. They're basically telling you that they know. And this is actually ancient Sumerian etching or relief, and he's holding a pine cone, and he's got angelic wings. This is what people will call Anunnaki. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you believe in that or not, but they're basically, displaying a symbolic angelic being holding a pine cone. So what is the power? Why would this be in there if it wasn't significant? This is actually another version of Dionysus. The staff has a pine cone on it as well. This is also eventually where we get our medical symbol that we see all the time today, where you have the two serpents, kundalini going up the staff and wings opening up, and oftentimes a solar disk with wings or a pine cone. So my point is that the solar system is moving in a vortex, cone, or a spiral, and so is everything else. This is actually the same book, Newton's drawing of a very famous comet when he was alive. He compiled data from other astronomers all over North Africa, Europe, and a little bit of Asia. And he compiled all their data and put it together in his magnus opus. And he drew it, and he did all the math. And I'm just pointing out, it's a two-dimensional drawing, but it sure looks like a vortex cone to me. So again, the philosophy, mathematics is a language, it's a number that we should hold reverence for, but understand that also it's easily manipulated just like any other language. More harmonics of the sun and the moon. So the sun's radius is 432,000 miles. The moon's diameter is 2,160 miles. Half of 432 is 216. So we know there's a relationship right there, that they're in communication with each other. They hold some sort of balance and harmony, just simply by the numbers. And then if you were to add up 4, 3, and 2, well, it equals 9. If you were to add up 2, 1, 6, and 0, it equals 9. So I don't think there's a coincidence there. And then, ironically, if you were to square 432, it just so happens to be the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. All have a digital root of 9. This is what it looks like, the Fibonacci sequence in artistic form. These are never-ending spirals, but you can also infer squares in here. See, so this is what the Leonardo da Vinci's famous drawing of the I forgot the name of it. Vitruvian Man, thank you. You know, he's squaring the circle. He's got his arms out, and one of them is fully enclosed in the circle, and the other one is fully enclosed in the square. And the whole drawing was built off of the Fibonacci sequence. So he's just showing you in an incredibly creative way that the cubic waveform, so the cube and the circle, are the symbolic manifestations of creation itself. These are actually individual people's urine streams. Notice that they move in spiraling vortex cones. The icon of all, the greatest icon of the spiral is the nautilus. The way in which these shells form move in the same 1.618 ratio, this harmonic. Now this is cymatics. Cymatics is where you take sand or water or some other liquid and you put it onto a plate that resonates with sound. So electric current is run through the plate, and then they play either dissonant tones or harmonic tones. And it's just amazing that nature has decided to, when you play harmonic tones at different frequencies, that they form, symmetrical patterns. Like, they're very organized. So these are all different Hertzian tones, but they're not disorganized. When you play a dissonant tone, they get disheveled, and so what this is telling you is that the way in which sound moves as a wave moves in a spiral, and when you hone that spiral at certain frequencies, it creates artwork, beautiful artwork. These, to me, remind me of what we would call a chakra. So if the energetic systems of the body, the kundalini or the serpent energy, or just the way in which you breathe, are working harmonically, then your energetic spheres are going to be working harmonically. And when they're not, they're going to be dissonant. And so one interesting way to look at this is 432 hertz on the left and 440 hertz on the right. If you look at the right, you notice that it's a little bit, it's not as pretty as the one on the left. It's not as balanced, right? It's not as geometric. It's not as symmetric. And we typically hone our current symphonies to, I believe it's the oboe, my dad would know, to A440 and not A432. So we're just 8 hertz off of being right in the heart chakra, And there's been a lot of talk of musicians from the European tradition that would say, when they, like Stradivarius, when he would make a violin, he would actually say he could tune it to this frequency. because it was so harmonic, saying that his ear and his body could detect this frequency. Walter Russell, again, mediocrity is self-inflicted, genius self-bestowed. And if you guys think I'm crazy and you don't believe any of this stuff, I gotta quote Friedrich Nietzsche. And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. Mm-hmm. I hope you guys can hear the music, because my whole point here is to inspire this type of thinking. So you'll kind of go down your own research paths. Brilliant esotericist Thomas H. Burgoyne wrote a book called The Light of Egypt, The Science of the Soul and the Stars. And it's very dense, but he says, the soul sends forth its pleading cry for light. Who and what is God? Faintly, as the distant vesper sounds upon the cooling eve, comes the answer. Who and what art thou? What canst thou see? What delectable blessing does nature vouchsafe to the pure in heart? We tremble with the awful yet thrilling revelation. We know dimly, yet fail to realize in our outward consciousness the full import thereof. We realize we're in the mistaken selfhood have become the only begotten of the Father. It's basically saying we've fallen off center. When you ask these powerful questions like, who am I? What's the nature of God? What is God? What is divinity? No matter where you seek to find the answer, or whatever reflection reveals that answer to you, it's always going to be found within. Martin Heidegger, German philosopher, existentialist, understanding of being is itself a determination of being, known as Das Ein. Another, basically just a really good way of saying that we are consciousness and that we actually co-create our reality. We define our own limits as well as our own empowerment. He goes on to say, if I take death into my life, acknowledge it, and face it squarely, I will free myself from the anxiety of death and pettiness of life, and only then will I be free to become myself. It's to go through all of this stuff about death, just to become himself. This is from Corinthians in the Bible. The bottom one I'm going to read is from the Gospel of Thomas. You are the temple of God, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. Done. Close the book. You got it. That's it. Answer. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. So selfhood is this incredibly important thing that human beings have the capacity for a reason. It might be our only reason for showing up here in the first place. We should consider engaging in it. Jiddu Krishnamurti. The more you know yourself, the more clarity there is. Self-knowledge has no end. You don't come to an achievement. You don't come to a conclusion. It is an endless river. He's speaking of the apophatic process. I can't say that word enough. The apophatic process is a deconstructing of what or who you think you are at this moment. So the practice of deconstructing your current paradigm or your current belief system is selfhood. What you come to in that moment is selfhood. But if you practice this transcendental way of thinking, you're engaging in your own selfhood, which is what he was trying to teach. Wilhelm Reich, again, if the psychic energies of the average mass of people watching a football game or a musical comedy could be diverted into the rational channels of freedom, of a freedom movement, they would be invincible. The thing is that we oftentimes don't want freedom. We have this thing called Stockholm Syndrome where, psychologically speaking, the abused, what's the word? The abused connect to their abuser on an unconscious level. And so they continue to be, let's say, battered, whether it be physical, emotional, verbal, mental. And they won't free themselves, even if the door is wide open. This is basically a slave mentality. And he's saying that the power always lies within us. Neil Kramer again, the fastest way to dissolve empire is to cultivate your own power and excellence.
What did JFK say?
Say again?
What did JFK say?
There is a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot.
That's what that recently.
I skipped this slide because my intent is to not go into too political here. But JFK, spoke these words for a reason. Osho, current mystic, pretty brilliant guy. Your whole idea about yourself is borrowed from those who have no idea who they are themselves. This is where you have to consider your teachers. If you're seeking a guide, a guru, a shaman, a teacher, there's nothing wrong with that. I encourage it. I work with the Native American tradition, as well as the yogic tradition, as well as sort of my own creative tradition. I'm creating, and there's nothing wrong with seeking guidance from a teacher. But the moment you detect that teacher has allowed their persona to get in the way, or allowed their ego to get in the way, to where they're withholding information from you, typically they withhold it because they don't know. But they don't want you to know that they don't know. So he is saying that so many teachers prop themselves up in order to be a guide to help people, through this incredible process, massive process of selfhood. But they themselves are not really doing the work. If you detect that in your teacher, go elsewhere. Selfhood, there is no greater quest, again, Friedrich Nietzsche. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Again, this is the shadow work. The collective or the herd mentality is always going to be a barometer of mediocrity. It doesn't mean you can't be a part of your own town or group or culture, but understanding that ultimately your selfhood has to be done completely and solely by you. All your paradigm shifts are going to happen most likely when you're alone or in deep states of oneness. Manly P. Hall from The Secret Teachings of All Ages, massive esotericist. When the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance. When the church governs, he is ruled by superstition. And when the state governs, he is ruled by fear. Interesting. Before men can live together in harmony and understanding, ignorance must be transmuted into wisdom, superstition into illumined faith, and fear into love. Alan Watts, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves.
He's got the best laugh.
He is awesome. Yeah, I love Alan Watts. He's awesome. A Taoist at heart, I think. Terence McKenna. Awakening is the awakening of the intelligence of the heart. Reason is born with us. If we give it preponderance over cerebral intelligence, meaning stuck in the left brain, over the mental, it will tell us everything, for it is the intelligence of the universe. Why is the heart center of the intelligence of the universe? It's because heart energy, if you want, or love, I want to call it that, its whole design is to connect everything, interconnectedness, right? It doesn't matter like what dimension it's in or what size it is or whatnot. It's all interconnected. So when we're aware of our heart space, we tend to connect with everything, whether it be inanimate or animate. Pythagoras. The light of the physical sun warms and reveals the bodies of things. The light of the physic sun nourishes and reveals the psychic sun nourishes and reveals the structure of the soul. The light of the spiritual sun sustains and nourishes the human spirit. The sun is birthing the Trinity in our solar system. It is a three-aspect body of psychic, physic, and spirit. A deity is an infinite being whose body is composed of the substance of light. and whose soul is composed of the substance of truth. There is therefore a kind of light, and when it shines, a kind of darkness is dissipated. Truth is to the darkness of ignorance what the physical sun is to the darkness of nature. There is also a spiritual sun, and the total energy of the sun dissipates total illusion. That is morality and materiality. The spiritual sun is forever dispelling the kind of darkness which we call death. I'll say that again. The spiritual sun is forever dispelling the kind of darkness which we call death. The psychic sun is forever dispelling the kind of darkness we call ignorance. And the physical sun is forever dispelling crystallization, meaning creating the body. Frederick Schelling probably couldn't be said any better than this. Nature is visible spirit. A spirit is invisible nature. Theodore Roszak, a psychologist. Speaking of the ego, again, what we identify with, or the id. The id conserves from its long maturing process our treasury of ecological intelligence. Its intractability stems from its deeply ingrained resistance to all social forms that endanger the harmony of the human and the natural. Its untamed selfishness represents a bond between psyche and cosmos, whose distant origins reach back to the initial conditions of the Big Bang. Basically just saying that whether you're aware of it or not, you are the cosmos. And there's a connection there that runs from the infinite right into you. And you have access to that information. Kind of move along here. The Temple of Man in Luxor, this massive book right here, is the most impressive work on Egyptology you'll ever find, in my opinion. This temple is about almost a quarter mile in length, and it's built as the human body from the sky. So Schwaller de Lubbix is the man who actually discovered this about 2,400 years after it was built. So people have been walking around this temple for a long time and didn't know that it was actually built on Phi and Pi. And he's the guy who discovered it. And so it's built as the human body from the sky because they were encoding the spirit of the cosmos in their temple as the body. This is a long time ago. This is what it looks like. But it's pretty brilliant that the stuff that I'm talking about right now is not new. It's very old. Very, very old. And it just shows that our current culture and society that sort of pontificates itself as being like the greatest society to ever live because we have lasers and cell phones and other nice technology, they're constantly downplaying the history. And there's real, true historical revisionists out there that easily prove that ancient cultures were as advanced as we are, maybe expressed it in different ways. But this temple is still standing, and there's no denying the chambers that you go in, and there's no denying the harmonic resonances of sound and light when you're actually in the temple itself. We see the same harmonic in the way, again, just more edifying the way plants grow from the roots to the trees. In the periodic table with 17 inert gases, they're all built on harmonics of Phi and Pi. For each and every form is merely a passing instant, a transient aspect of the divine light. He wrote in a posthumously published note, "This is why things only die in their form, and why every death is the source of new life. Only the divine light is deathless, because it is bornless, and therefore fixed and eternal." Just pointing again to that all bodies dissolve. So everything we see in the material world, we think, if you watch it long enough, it will disintegrate. So consciousness is responsible for creating these bodies. But consciousness doesn't die. It transforms. Black Elk, Lakota leader. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe in all its powers. And when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells Wonkampanka, which means holy. And that is the center, and this center is everywhere. It is within each of us. So we see this in ancient cultures right up to today. We see this in the traditional wisdom teachers of the Lakota and other Native American tribes who haven't fallen so far off center. You know, they maintained what they call a bridge between the smallest piece of life and the cosmos. And they practice this in their ways of living and in their ceremonies. And they say it in such eloquent ways. It's you don't need science for this. It's just obviously apparent because nature has been their greatest teacher, and they haven't lost that sacred connection to it. Gurdjieff. This is Khalil Gibran, the poet. They deem me mad because I will not sell my days for gold, and I deem them mad because they think my days have a price. Snap! We are all basically divine, and of the divine, the spiraling fire within. We are sovereign beings. It's just whether or not we're ready to embark on that journey and actively and commit and engage with that journey, because it's intense. But you just have, in my opinion, you just have two kind of people. The people that are awake enough to know that there's really nothing greater going on than doing this kind of work, and then the kind that are just basically automatons, that just whatever the latest fashion or whatever they're barraged with by their current culture. It doesn't have to be Western culture. They just assume that that's the way reality is, and they just go on like that. Ezra Pound, a slave is someone who waits for someone to come to freedom. Rudolf Steiner again. Our highest endeavor must be to develop free human beings who are able of themselves to impart purpose and direction to their lives. See, he's not pontificating about the nature of spirit. He's just talking about freedom, because he knows that every single human soul or self, deep down in its original design, is sovereign and divine. This is from my book, SUN King here. The infinite consciousness, or the Nawal in the Toltec tradition, in terms of numbers, is oneness as being irreducible. It has no split or division. It's non-dual. And in this creation, by it, man is born, and he is still encoded oneness, but is split or dual. He is dual because, by design, he is created as the density of matter, or the mortal body, and the levity of spirit, or immortal aspect. Man is both, but by his divine design encodes oneness. So he is the reducible one as long as he has a physical body. Being reducible gives rise to the number 2, and the duality is manifested. Now, the manifestation of geometry can build into dimensions, and this is why geometry is at the very least 3-dimensional. And now we have the number 3. The Trinity giving rise to form as we sense it by our bodies. The body of man will eventually be dissolved into earth. This is the reducible part of his oneness. Whereas God, or infinite consciousness, has no body and cannot be reduced. It is all it is. Seeing this is cosmomimetic, meaning we become a reflection of the universal consciousness itself. We understand finally we are directly in contact with reality itself. I know, it's a lot of number theory. It's a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, but it's in reference to oneness. Definition of consciousness by Walter Russell. Consciousness is the spiritual light of mind, or the source of all seeming motion and energy that exists in stillness and silence. So consciousness exists in stillness and silence. The universal one, God, creator, etc., is holy mind and simulates all idea by dividing stillness to create the illusion of motion where no motion is. All motion extends from and returns to the same source. This is incredibly difficult to wrap your mind around. But in the science of light, he's basically saying that, here's one way to say this, is that if light is the fastest thing in the universe, and it's everywhere, always at the same time, it's not moving at all. Hopefully that comes through. Because if it's everywhere all the time, always, it's actually perfectly still. So the things that we see as movement are, according to Walter Russell, are fragmentations of consciousness. They reflect consciousness, but stillness is actually where consciousness resides. And all motion is born from stillness. Carlos Castaneda. The trick is in what we emphasize. We either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. Chief Crazy Horse, Tasumka Mutko. I salute the light within your eyes where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within yourself and I within mine, we shall be as one. And then I'm going to close real quick here. I'm going to read a little bit more from Michael Tsarian. Speaking of transformative experiences, he's speaking about transformative experiences with animals. Well, of course there's transformative experiences. Why? Because animals don't relate to you as a shadow or a persona or a personality. The animal's relationship to you is only as a self. Even if you're not in the state of selfhood, this is miraculous. That's why people say it's healing to be around animals. The animal is not buying into all that persona stuff. The animal relates to the person purely as itself. So you now learn about the mystery of selfhood and humanness from your interaction with animals and what we may call inanimate. You have to fall in love with that which is not animate, that which you mistakenly think is dead. See, the problem with us is that human beings always want to spend most of their energy in getting into relationships with other human beings because human beings give us back the cues and affectations that our egos desire. But there's a whole other magical world out there. When have you last talked to the light around you? Or listened to the wind? When have you last addressed the air or the ocean? The sky is painted a different hue for you every few minutes. Do you notice it? There's simplicity all around you. You can't say which is more beautiful, a dead rose or a live rose. Nature is painting her picture for you every single day, and there's a miracle going on everywhere. Have you deeply looked at the skin of a fruit? Are you aware of the present beauty in a decaying building, or a rusted lamppost, or a guitar, or a piano sitting in the corner? Are you aware of that intense beauty? No. We are all looking to other humans because we are so in need of dependency. While there is a whole other panoply out there, a whole incredible, magical, mystical tradition out there in the world, and we are not even aware of it. It is nature and the beauty of its creatures and animals and what they can teach us. So, the full and whole human being consciously desists from a lot of his relationships with other humans to willingly become very, very aware of the inanimate around him. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger says, in the German language, the word for thinking, danken, is exactly the same root as danke, which is thank you or gratitude. Meaning that every thought that you think should be an act of gratitude. Ask yourself, is it? So the true human being, from the moment he opens his eyes, is in a state of gratitude for his life, his presence, and his beingness. And so with that, I respectfully say thank you for listening. Questions?
We have about 10 minutes or so for questions.